To get my caveats out of the way here, so this is going to be based off of not just whether I like the character, although that will play a factor, but based off of how well I think the character is written and how well I think the character fits into the world and the story that is provided. But this is going to be solely characters who are playable for long enough for me to consider them a part of the playable cast, discounting Reverie and Sky Third, because I haven't finished Reverie yet, and Sky Third I never played because of where it was never available on the platform I was playing on. So, that's what this bottom category is here. These are all the characters I have kind of cut out as being characters who, while this thing considers them playable, they weren't really available in a way that I was able to actually play. Like, Vita was briefly in one of the end dungeons, but you could only use her as kind of a side character, same with Roselia. Characters like Alan were only available for a single fight, for a quest fight, so like, they don't really count to me.
Nice.
So we're gonna get this started. Let me get up my notes. So, Agate. I have kind of mixed feelings about Agate. I really didn't like him at all in Sky, but I think they've done a pretty good job in the Cold Steel games of giving him a bit of a softer side and giving him a character to build with, to grow with. Yes, indeed, Beryl. Sunglass Beryl. I think they've given him a character to grow with in the form of Tita. And I think that's definitely improved his character a lot. I feel like they've done a better job of building him. So I'm going to put him in the good category here. I don't love him. I don't think he's a great character, but he's not a bad character. Now, Alphen, on the other hand, Alphen is fantastic. I think I'm going to put Alphen in the amazing category. So to clarify why, I think Alphen is a perfect example of showing a character with great responsibility without a ton of power who has to deal with a really, really hard lot. I think her growth in showing that she's still very much just, she's a teenage girl. She's going through school. She's trying her best to have a teenage girl life.
Nice.
But at the same time, she also has to deal with being the princess of a family during a civil war where one of her brothers is being manipulated into being evil, and one of her brothers is missing. So like, there's all these missing, potentially presumed dead. There's all these heavy weights on her shoulder, and they did a really good job of writing her in a way that makes her very endearing, very sweet, very gentle, but also giving her a bit of a will. And I'm just realizing I forgot to bring my water over here after going to fill it, so I will be back in just 1 second.
Nice.
Okay, I am back. So yes, where were we? I was about to get water because talking is hard. Yeah, Alphen is just a really, really good character. Elisa, I'm currently waffling between great and amazing for her. I think she's a very well-written character. I always appreciate when games manage to successfully use a trope to give a character, when games or stories manage to use like a trope character his character style, to give a character a relatable personality without needing to spend a ton of time on it, and then manage to make that trope make perfect sense. So to kind of give what I'm meaning here is, Elisa, her behavior, at least for the first couple of games, is very much stereotypical tsundere. But if you really dig into her backstory, it makes a lot of sense that she would react the way she does to things. And her backstory makes it a logical way for her to behave, even if it is also fitting within this stereotype. I also think that of almost any character in this series, the voice actress for Elisa did a really, really phenomenal job of portraying the character's growth and maturity. I distinctly remember several points over the course of Cold Steel where I noticed, changes in the voice patterns of the character that matched the way her character was behaving and the way her character was maturing, particularly as we got near the end of CS2 and then into CS3 and CS4. So I think Elisa is a very, very well done character. The one thing that really, really holds her back for me is Cold Steel, unlike Sky and unlike the Crossbow games, is not meant to have a canon relationship for the protagonist. And yet they very much treated Elisa like she was canon, like she was the canon ship for a long time. And that being shoved down our throats, despite her not really being the best fit for Reen in my opinion, was very, very annoying. So that is the one thing where I think that they kind of did her character a bit of a disservice. But at the same time, I think they did a lot really well with her, so I think I'm going to lean towards erring on the high side. But we'll see how things look as I get through more of the tier list. I may end up moving her down if I decide that like other characters that I feel like putting in that same tier were written better or things like that. Now here we have my biggest surprise when I first... This character, Altina, was the biggest surprise for me in this game. I'm just going to drop her where I put her, and then I'm going to explain. Altina is one of the best written characters in this series. When they first announced, when I first saw that Altina was going to be a part of the playable cast in Cold Steel 3, I was very worried, because I did not have high expectations for that. The way she was written in CS2, she didn't really have enough of a personality to feel like a playable character. But what that allowed them to do was give you this almost sense of raising a daughter through her over the course of the game. Like, you got to see Reen as he saw her very much as his own child in a lot of ways, as she started to develop as a person, as she started to come to the realization that she was allowed to be a person. Because for those who don't know, she's homunculus. She was created artificially as effectively as part of a ritual that was basically that ended up being like the primary story of the games. So like, she is not like, she was originally just following orders, and that was her sole personality trait. I still remember one scene, I think it was in CS3, where Reen had to order her to develop a hobby so that she would develop a hobby, but then at the very end of the game, she was so interested in that hobby that like it became a defining facet of her personality, and it was such an interesting growth. They did such a good job on her. And like, if you don't by the end of Cold Steel 4 adore Altina, I don't know what you're doing, because she is just an absolute Like, she's just an absolute joy to watch grow through the series. Next, Angelica. We're going to a little bit of the opposite end of the spectrum here. I'm currently debating for her between not so good and good. I don't think any characters are bad in this game, but Angelica, she's fun to have around. She has some interesting conversations, but she's really more of a meme than anything. She's, you know, token lesbian, essentially. She constantly goes around hitting on every female in you know, a 10-mile radius. And she really only has two interests, those being her bikes and women. And it just... there's just not much to her. Like, she's fun. I don't hate her. I actually like her because she is funny.
Nice.
But I don't think she's really very well written. Like, it's definitely possible to like a character who's not well written, and Angelica is kind of good for that.
Nice.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Ash. I'm going to start in grade and see if I talk myself up. Ash is a character I do not like. I often, if you've watched my streams, I often call him Ass. I do not like his character. I do not like him. But the reason I don't like him is because he's well written in a character archetype that I don't like. And how much I don't like him, to me, feels like a bit of a testament to how well he's written, to how well he's, like, envisioned.
Nice.
He is only in the game, only in the series for the last two games, and Reverie, but again, this is as of CS4. He's only in the game for CS3 and CS4. And while he does have a very pivotal role in the story, that's not a ton of time. But the character moments they gave him and the importance to the story is hard to really oversell. He has some really fascinating moments. There's some really interesting discussions between him and Muse, and between him and Reen, and also between him and Lecter and a few other characters too. There's just some really cool stuff that he's involved in that just makes me like him less. But again, that's because he's just an archetype that I can't stand. I think I'm talking myself into amazing, but similar to Elisa, I'm going to reserve the right to drop him back down based off of the other characters I put up there. This got swapped around the wrong way. Now, we have our resident cat girl. Our resident literal cat girl. For this form is where we see her in the most. But she does very much have a humanoid form where she is a literal cat girl.
Nice.
And I think I'm kind of between great and good. There's a weird mix of, like, abrasive, sweet, and shy that she has that's just very endearing to me. And the fact that she is such an integral part of the story of who I think is probably the best or second best written character in the entire series gives her some definite bumps in my eyes. we'll get to that part later. I think great is a good place for her. She is a very, very interesting character. She's fun to watch. Her interactions with Reen are hilarious, and her interactions with some of the other cast, like Roselia and like Emma and like Vita, are just great.
Nice.
And I'm so glad that she is kind of come back into the story in Reverie, but that's not for this. Claire is another one that's fairly interesting to me, because you would think, so Claire is in the prime of her life. She's in her late 20s, she's got a mature career, she's got kind of everything's going for her. She's in, you know, the prime of her life. So you wouldn't think there would be a ton of development they could do for her. But thanks to the way that she is kind of partially against her will, partially with her own blessing, put into the story in a way that kind of gives her some internal conflict, she really grows in some interesting ways, and I've really enjoyed watching kind of the dichotomy of her as she develops into her eventual end role in CS4. I think I'm going to put her next to Celine in the great category. She's another one of those characters that's just really good. She doesn't, like, blow me away or anything, but she has some really interesting moments and some really good kind of roles to play. Now we get to one of the characters that annoys me. Crow, I think I'm going to put down next to Angelica. Now, he's a fairly popular character, so hear me out for a sec here. I think what they did with him in late CS3 and into CS4 really did him a disservice and kind of shattered any goodwill I had.
Nice.
Even at the end of CS2, like, I wish his arc had ended where it should have. Legend of Heroes is a series that is notorious for not killing off characters. There's a couple of moments where it's killed characters off. You can... I won't say who specifically, but, like, there are a couple who have had, you know, ceremonious or unceremonious ends, be they protagonists or otherwise. But Legend of Heroes is notorious for its unwillingness to unwillingness to actually kill off characters, and Crow is kind of the poster child for that. Crow should not have come back to life at the end of CS2. Crow should have had his tragic ending and have that be it. The role he played in CS3 and 4 could have easily been filled by another, could have easily been omitted without too much trouble. And I just think that because he had all this extra time of just being the guy who shouldn't be there, it turned him from being a relatively decent character. If his story had ended at the end of 2, I probably would put him in the good or the great category. He would have been a very interesting member of the cast. But because it continued and he just has these 2 full games of just kind of being there and not really knowing what he's supposed to be doing and not really knowing why he's there and not really knowing how he's there, it just, like, the whole thing just soured me on him. So I'm putting him down in that low category. As a contrast, though, we have Doobly, who is... Doobly I'll probably be fairly brief about. Doobly is... Doobly's a pretty solid character. I think maybe in the good category is probably the best place for her. I really appreciate the way that the lines of good and evil in Trails games are muddled. There's not a lot of pure evil, and even members of Ouroboros, who are our perennial bad guys, are not all evil. While Duvalie is not the best example of this, she is a good example of a character whose personality lends themselves to picking the side that makes that to not necessarily always being on the same side. She is very much lawful neutral, I guess. She's pure lawful, would probably be the best way to describe her. She has a code of ethics, and she will follow that code. And over the course of the time you see her, that code kind of leads her to change where she belongs. And I think that's a good way for character development to go. Ellie's another one of Ellie has the same kind of situation as Elise Elisa going in terms of relationship with the protagonist, but in Ellie's case it's handled much better. I really do enjoy the relationship between Lloyd and Ellie. Ellie, however, I don't think has as many growth moments as some of the other characters had. So she's a good character, and there's a sincerity to her that's very hard not to like. And while her character arc is very touching and, elegantly handled, she's not a standout for me. She's a very, very good character, and I thoroughly enjoyed having her on screen. That's not a reference to her appearance, although regardless of whether she's attractive, they all are. Every female character in this series is attractive. She's just a very sincere character, and it's yeah, there's not much else to say. Like that's the problem. There's not a ton to say about her. She's a good character, a very solid character, and she has a nice, simple, elegant character arc. I think in general, and we're gonna see this as we go on, in general, I think most, with a few exceptions of the Crossbell arc characters, are not my favorite characters. I think the Crossbell arc was, I liked the Crossbell arc a lot, but I think it didn't do as good things to develop the cast as the other arcs did. On to Elise, though. Elise's big drawback is that she is Reen's sister. She is the token Brocon character. And the extent to which they pull that card is probably the one thing that holds her back from being an absolutely amazing character. Because she's like an absolute sweetheart. She has this really interesting kind of coming into her own as she works to convince her overprotective brother that she has, something to offer and that she is able to take care of herself. And the gradual progression of their relationship in terms of his protectiveness and her competency, her coming into her own as a competent character, is really interesting to watch. It's just a pity that they throw the kind of romantic hint into it. If it was just, overprotective brother and sister trying to live up to her brother's expectations, Elise would be up here, maybe even up here. But the fact that there's this constant romantic undertone for her towards him, it doesn't work as well as like the romantic relationships for a lot of the other characters do.
Noise.
And I think that is kind of the one thing that keeps her from being a really, really solid character. Elliot's probably going to be another fairly short one. He's a very likable character. He exists in the story to give the sympathetic, ordinary, nice guy perspective on the story. Like, that's what he is. In a character, amidst all of these, arrogant nobles and the caste war between some of the characters and the, like, master swordsman's daughter and the
Noise.
tsundere and the main character holding a demon in his chest, like, he is the ordinary one. And he's fairly well done in that. And that role is important, but it's hard to really hold that role in high esteem. And I think that's all there is to say. Like, he's fine. Now here we have my favorite character in the series. And not just because she shares a name with my wife. I think Emma's character growth is handled absolutely phenomenally. I think despite her being like scion of a centuries-old witch and wielder of phenomenal power and eminently brilliant, also like my wife, they make this character who, like, they give her struggles that are very believable despite her they give her struggles that are very believable, and I think the relationship between her and Reen is definitely the most organic of them and the most, like, logical. Like, the two of them feel like they should be together in my eyes. So she is, in my eyes, the canon ship. But she is just this absolutely, like, the struggles with her self-confidence and her kind of proverbially letting her hair down to like reveal who she is and, like, acknowledge that, like, she's allowed to be who she is. She doesn't need to, pretend, and she's allowed to let her power show, kind of thing. It's really, really well done, and every time the series brings her into the story, I just smile, because she's just such a great character, and she's so lovable. Also like my wife. So yeah, she's... Whether Emma is the best written character or the second best written character is hard to say, because Altina is just so well done. She's definitely my favorite character. And she's definitely in that, like, top 2, top 3.
Nice.
It's debatable between them, but she's such a good character. Now, Estelle is my favorite of the 3 protagonists. Between Estelle, Lloyd, and Reen, I think Estelle has the most interesting character. I think Estelle has the most interesting writing. She's the funniest of them. She has the most personality. And she is definitely the star of the protagonists, and she's really the star of the Sky Games. Like, she is the reason the Sky Games work. The entire story is on her back, and not to say that the characters around her aren't good. I think you'll see a lot of Sky characters up in those great and amazing tiers as we move on. But she has this effect of kind of dragging the story forward, kicking and screaming, and it's really, really interesting to watch. And she has some of the absolute funniest lines of dialogue in the entire series are hers, and it's just great. Also, I think of all of the relationships in this series, like counting NPCs, with the possible exception of maybe Alan and Bridget's, the relationship between Estelle and Joshua is the most well-written and well-developed of them. So that's a factor too. B goes up in this best category as well. I love Fee. We should just let Fee take the naps she wants to take and leave her be, because she just deserves naps and she deserves head pats. And why do we keep interrupting her naps and her head pats? But to go more in detail about her character, there are some really, really interesting conflicts surrounding her character that just make her so interesting and so endearing. The rivalry between her and Laura is spectacularly well handled. I love watching the two of them kind of settle their differences and move on to be these night and day friends, where like they're absolute polar opposites in terms of like personality type, but they're just the best of friends, and it's so cool to watch. I also think that the things she has to overcome in terms of like her emotion, like understanding her emotions, and in terms of the character, like her character defining challenges, are very, very relatable, despite the fact that she grew up in this absolutely unrelatable situation. And I think that is a testament to how well written she is. And it's just so great to watch her learn to value people, because I can certainly appreciate that can be difficult. It may not sound it if you're the type of person who always has, but it's not always the easiest thing. And now we get to probably the only... Yeah, well, no. One of maybe two male characters who's going to make the top cut. Japanese developers are not good at writing male characters. And while the Legend of Heroes devs are, or Legend of Heroes writers are better than most, that is a rant for another day, but it is very true. Gaius, though. Gaius is composed, he's kind, he's caring, he's intelligent, he's humble, and most importantly, the game never plays any of those to be weaknesses. There's never a moment where you get the feeling that like the game thinks his kindness or his compassion are a weakness. And in many ways the game plays them to be strengths. And that is one of my biggest pet peeves, and not just with Japanese games, with modern writing in general, is so often it is painted as a weakness for a male character to not be strong and merciless, and like if you're not strong and cold and merciless, then you are weak and ineffectual. And there's nothing about Gaius's character that makes that seem like the way that the developers feel, and I just adore Gaius. Like, if they had written it so that Gaius and Reen were the actual canon relationship, and Gaius and Reen were both gay, I would be 100% in favor of that, because the two of them are so alike and match so well. Like, he is the only one that I will allow to compete with Emma for Reen's affection.
Noise.
If they wanted to go that route, I would be cheering for it. He's just such a great character, and when you get to Nord and get to see like his affection for his homeland and his affection for his family, and his growth into his new role as you get into like CS3 and CS4, yeah, he is right up there with the best written characters in the series and with the best written male characters ever. And as it should be, Joshua is right next to Estelle. The two of them both fall into that amazing category. Joshua has the biggest roller coaster of character development imaginable. He is I still remember being slack-jawed at what happened with him at the end of Sky 1. And I don't know if I will ever fully forgive him for the wound that moment left in my heart, even like 15, 20 years later. Or 15 years later. But the fact that that was the case, and the fact that they continued to weave his character arc and his character growth through so many of the games in such logical ways. Yeah, Joshua's great.
Noise.
Yuna is another one of those ones where I sometimes struggle to grade her. Sometimes I think she's amazing, and sometimes I find her really annoying. And not in a way of like I don't like her personality, but in the way of they really used her character in some weird ways and forced some character growth on her in ways that didn't make a lot of sense. I think, like, I really like her, and I really like her role in the game. But all of her character growth, or not all, but a lot of her character growth felt so incredibly forced.
Noise.
It just felt like they wanted her to get to a certain point so that she could fill a certain role in the story, and they didn't quite know how to get there in the time they had. So they were just like, well, during this fight, she's just gonna come to this realization, or, and there was a lot of moments of, like, suddenly she realizes something, or suddenly her character has an epiphany, not an epitome, an epiphany, and is now a new character. Not quite that blatant, but
Noise.
there was a lot of that sort of thing. And I think that really held her back.
Noise.
Eustace, though, I had an argument with a friend of mine about whether Eustace, this was back in Cold Steel 1 and 2, about whether Eustace was the worst character in the game or not. My tone's changed. He is not. He is actually a very good character. In Cold Steel 1, he is obnoxious, he's a bully, he's arrogant. But over the course of Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4, mostly 3 and 4, but Cold Steel 2 as well, they give him such good opportunities to kind of confront the parts of his personality that were problematic and overcome them and become
Nice.
a good character. And we'll get to Milliam later, but Eustace's relationship with Milliam, Eustace's kind of protective friendship, sister relationship with her, is absolutely adorable. Even if Milliam seems to think it's something else, and that's a different story we'll get to when we talk about Milliam. But Eustace and the relationship with Milliam, did a lot to kind of
Nice.
give him a softer side as well. Similar to how Agate's relationship with Tita gave him a softer side. Eustace definitely needed Milliam as this character to care about, to see as like a little sister figure, and it's done a lot for him. And as a result, I'm putting him in the great category. I like Eustace a lot at this point. Claudia, I'm waffling between great and amazing. I think I'll probably put her in great. It's weird. There's a lot of moments in Sky and Sky 2 that I don't remember super clearly because it's been 10-15 years since I've played them. But I remember a very strong fondness for Claudia's character, and not just because she has a bird. Her having a bird is definitely a pro in her favor, and anybody who's trusted by an epic bird like this has to be a good person. Same reason Gaius has to be a good person. He has a bird too. But I think Claudia is kind of in the same boat as Alphen, just without her sense of powerlessness. Like, there's a sense of powerlessness to Alphen that she has to confront that really gives her this sense to do what she can with what she has, because she doesn't have much authority. She mostly just has her reputation. Whereas Claudia actually has authority. And Claudia is actually the crown princess of her nation. So, like, there's a degree of additional there's a degree of additional growth for Alphen. That's why I put her in the amazing category, whereas Claudia's only in the great category. But I think they're both very similar character arcs, and I think both of them were really well done. And yeah, I really like... And I really like some of the interactions that Claudia's gotten in some of the later games, like relating to Lecter in some of the games and things like that. There's some really interesting stuff there. So yeah, Claudia's fitting in that nice middle category as well. She's a very, very good character. Kurt. As kind of a slight spoiler for when I eventually do an updated version of this for Reverie, Kurt will move up in Reverie,
Nice.
but Kurt is a character that I like, but he just seems underutilized. He has the same... Actually, now that I think about it, he has the same role as Elliot, except he's not quite as normal as Elliot. But, like, all of the other characters in the new Class 7 have these eccentricities to them. And Kurt is kind of the normal one. He's just an ordinary kid trying to live up to his family's reputation, and live up to his family name. But he never really got a chance to shine in CS3 and CS4. He never really got a chance to have his character-defining moments. There was definitely some development there, and there were some good scenes. So he's not going like all the way down into the not-so-good category, but I think he needed some additional personal moments to give him something like of his own to within the games. And I think Reverie has kind of given him a bit of that, so I think Reverie would kind of push him up there, but this is for Cold Steel and Cold Steel 4, so that's where he's going. Laura's going in that great category as well. Laura has some of the better character moments in the Cold Steel series. her friendship with Reen, and again, to go back to Fee again, Laura's friendship with Fee and rivalry with Fee are both very high points to the story. I think Laura suffers from her base personality being a bit one note, which makes it harder for them to kind of push her out of that without making it seem out of character. So I think they do a good job of doing that, but there's not enough depth to her character for her to really jump into that like amazing tier. So I think great is a good place for her to sit. I do also think though, the reason why she's in great as opposed to just like the good category is that her friendship with Reen has some really fascinating character building between the two of them. And I think that is one of the shining roles that she fills, is acting as the one person who really understands Reen's drive to become a swordsman. And the foil that allows her, the role that allows her to fill as kind of a foil for his inadequacies, his feelings of inadequacy, is very, very good and very helpful to the story as a whole. Lloyd. There's not a ton to say about Lloyd because he doesn't have a lot going for him. He's not a bad character. He just doesn't, like...
Noise.
They have him painted as this master detective, and they do an okay job of having him have, like, leaps of intuition at the right moments. But they never really feel like he's, like, working for them. It feels like he's just, like, he sits there thinking for a moment, and he's like, I know what's going on. And it's just like there's this, like, it's all intuitive, and it feels really... Yeah, he's not the best protagonist, in my opinion. One thing that's interesting about him, though, is that they very much used him as a prototype for Reen. Because, like, the two of them have very similar base personalities, just with different stuff layered on top. And when we get to Reen, we'll see. I'll let you know how well Reen's side of this worked. But for Lloyd's, they didn't really layer anything super interesting on top of it. So his base personality's fine. He's not a bad character. He's just not spectacular.
Noise.
And I think that might be part of why Azure is not, or the Crossbell games are not my favorite arc. Machias is the character I like the least of any character in this series. But I don't think he's inherently badly written. He's got some inherent prejudices to his personality, and nothing ever forced him to confront them. Things should have forced them to confront them, but he never really overcame most of his prejudices. He overcame his prejudice against nobility to an extent, although he still has I guess that's probably an inherited trauma from his family situation. Like, there are justifiable reasons for why he has the prejudices he has, but being able to explain a prejudice does not justify not confronting it. And I think the problem with Machias is that they never forced him to confront his prejudice, whether it be his sexism, even his prejudice against nobility is still kind of lingering. He seems to have a lot of prejudice, and he seems to be just a very hateful person who is played off as not being hateful. And it's kind of weird and kind of unpleasant. But his prejudice is well written. Like, he feels like a genuine person who has inherent biases. So, like, I'm not going to put him in the badly written category. He's just an okay written bad character. Like, he's an okay written bad person.
Noise.
So to take a quick detour here, so rid of him, if you ever see this tier list, know that I have come to agree with you on the Usus versus Machias debate. Moving on though. Millium.
Noise.
Millium's such a hard one to rate. I think I'm gonna put her in the great character category. She has kind of a similar set of growth of like growth and development to Altina, but just not as well handled. And she has this one personality trait that I see in a lot of anime, so I'm not gonna say it's like unique to her. But it's never made sense to me in anything, whether it be anime, games, or otherwise. I have never met a woman, or girl, or anything, who was so obsessed with boobs that she is constantly talking about the fact that her boobs are gonna be big one day, and she's gonna, you know, don't sleep on her. She's gonna be big and sexy and big. And that is like the part of her personality that is just so obnoxious. And it doesn't make sense. It's not a well-written trope. It's not a trope that does a good thing. It's just a trope that shouldn't exist. But despite that, she has still been given a very good character arc, and I think that because of, again, to go back to that relationship with Usus, the Usus treating her like a sister, but her and her having this conflict between whether she just respects Usus as an attractive older role model, or whether she is physically attracted to him and is just going through a weird time in puberty. I think that's well handled. I think that's interesting. I think she's a good character for that. But I really wish the obsession with talking about how her boobs are going to be big one day was just not there. Just not there. Mueller? Mueller on his own would be probably just in the good category, but because Mueller is always seen as a foil for one of this series' most pivotal and most well-written characters, we'll get to him shortly, acting as the straight man for Olivier/Olivert is a hard role, and Mueller does it fantastically, and the two of them work so well together. And as a result, Mueller kind of sits in this role of being extremely important to the story while also not being that important to the story. And his character doesn't get a ton of growth, but he's also really, really interesting to watch as a foil for this other character. So I'm going to put him in the great category. I think he's better than good. I don't think he's amazing on his own. I think if he wasn't serving as a foil for Olivier, he would be down in the good or possibly even the not so good category, because like that is who he is. He is the foil for Olivier. I love Muse, and not just because I enjoy characters who are funny and flirtatious. Admittedly, I do. I generally find characters who have that flirtatious side, that sense of humor that kind of airs on the flirtatious. I enjoy that a lot. So Muse is good for that reason. But the real reason that Muse gets put into this top category is there's just so incredibly many layers to her character. every time you think you have a grasp on what she's thinking or where she's coming from, there's a twist to her character, and they're always interesting and they're always fun, and she's just a joy to have on the cast.
Nice.
I adore having her around. I adore watching her interact with Rain and Ash and Aurelia and all of these other characters, Vita during for a while. Like, she had this really unique role in the story and this really unique personality to match that role, and she's just great. Not Emma Altina great, but definitely up there. If I had to do like a top 10, she would be right up there. She might be in my top 5. That's a bit more of a gray area, because like, do I like her more than Gaius? Do I like her more than Fee? And then there's also another character. There's also at least one other character going up into that top category, possibly more than one. Noelle. I'm sorry to anyone who really likes Noelle, but there's nothing to her. I'm sorry. She's not very well developed. The one place where Noelle really has a good role is making her sister adorable. And her sister I would put up in the good category, because her sister is hilarious. But Noelle, she's just boring. She likes cars. I guess that's a character trait. She's in the military. I guess that's a character trait. Maybe? Maybe those are character traits? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Noelle does not. Yeah. Not great. Olivier, however, or Olivert as his formal name is, Olivier is amazing. An argument could be made that Olivert is the real protagonist of the entire series. He has so many different ways he's involved in the story. He has so many different plans going on. He has so much going for him. He's so intricate, and he's so funny. Olivert is amazing. He's the only other character the only other male character in this series that I would put on the same tier of writing as Gaius, and for a lot of the same reasons. Like, he has this intelligence and this humor to him, and this kind of charming passion for life and for love and for beauty that is just so endearing. But at the same time, he's also so integral to every single step of the story.
Nice.
And thus, Olivert, hats off to you. You are up there in the best category. Now we're on to Randy. I think Randy is better than Lloyd, but not by much. And I think the real key to why Randy is a better character than Lloyd is Cold Steel. I keep going back to it. I think the Crossbell games were not the strongest entries, but I think the Cold Steel games were phenomenal. And I think Randy came out of his shell at the branch campus in Cold Steel 3. Not came out of his shell, because it's not like he was introverted to begin with, but he really came into his own. The events of Azure were what set him up to be able to come into his own in Cold Steel 3. So, like, props to Azure for giving him the right events and the right lessons to learn. But it wasn't until Cold Steel where you really started to see him kind of grow as a person and kind of become a more complete character. So I think the arc into Cold Steel gives him that bump into the great category. And yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that. Reen, now we get to talk about Lloyd 2.0. Let me take a second to drink here. And I would say that the writers learned their lesson from Lloyd. Reen is a much better character than Lloyd.
Nice.
They gave Reen some personal struggles to overcome that weren't just, I want to know more about something that happened in the past, or I feel inadequate. While he does have a definite arc of overcoming a feeling of personal inadequacy, which I relate to a lot, the hidden power in him, as well as the way they handle the separation from his friends in CS1 into CS2, and then giving him that chance to become an adult. And I think that's the key. You get to see him in a formative stage, and then you get to see what he's learned from that formative stage when the series skips forward a few years into him being an adult as a teacher. And I think this, to again go back to it, Altina is kind of the defining character of Reen's story, other than possibly Emma. But I think Altina is the defining character of his story, and I think because Altina kind of gives him the opportunity to mature by having to push somebody to mature themselves, he gets this chance to grow in a really interesting way. And like into Cold Steel 3 and 4, like he never quite loses his martyr complex, but he does lose a lot of his or he does confront a lot of his feelings of inadequacy and kind of somewhat overcome them, and he grows into being like just a really good character. They did a lot of good with him. Now we have Ren. Remember how before I said that Claire was not the best example of a character going from being a bad guy to not a bad guy, or going from being on the wrong side of the cast, and so on? Ren is the best example of that. Ren's arc through Estelle, and I think Ren is a big part of the reason why Estelle is as good of a character as she is because of the way that you get to see her and Joshua kind of push Ren. Now, I've missed some of Ren's growth because I didn't play Sky 3, but even without playing Sky 3, just seeing her character in Cold Steel 3 and Cold Steel 4, as well as her brief roles in the other games as antagonists, and kind of watching her build up into it, as well as watching the Azure moments, the Zero and Azure moments, where you get to see Estelle and Joshua kind of finally break through to her. It's a big payoff. Like the moment, the Estelle Joshua Ren moment in the Crossbell games is one of the biggest emotional payoffs in the Crossbell games, which actually says a fair bit about the Crossbell games, because like it's not even a moment that's tied to their story, but also getting to see like Ren kind of make the decisions about how she wants to interact with her parents, who don't know who she is kind of interesting, or very, very interesting, I should say, kind of selling it short. Ren goes up in that top tier category. She is such an interesting character. She has so many high moments. And similar to Musei, she has that kind of flirtatious humor to her, which is a little bit weirder coming from Ren, because Ren is much younger than even Musei is, but I'll forgive it because they never actually try to sexualize her, even though she does have kind of a risque sense to her attitude. Risha is going to be our first person on the second row of the Great Line. Risha has some really, really interesting high moments. I keep saying interesting. Some really, really, like, some moments that do a great job of kind of building intrigue and also developing her character at the same time. And I think that the big reveal of, like, the big Yin Risha reveal was one of the more well-handled, like, oh, so that's what's happening, like the big, I guess, like almost gotcha moments where it's like, oh, where the curtain is removed from your eyes, kind of thing, where the blindfold is taken away. And I think that was a I'm apparently getting tired, words are escaping me. Good thing we're getting close to the end. Yeah, Risha's a great character. Her big reveal of who she is was well handled, and I really like what she brings to the cast in terms of a very unique focus, because, like, her motives, despite being scion of legendary assassins, her motives are very simple. She just wants to dance again, and a lot of her motives for joining like Lloyd and the team are just, I want to save this place that I live, that I love, so that I can dance again and celebrate it. And I think that level of, like, simple motives to a complex character works really well. Sarah, she's extremely popular, mostly because of her appearance. I think she's a fun, laid-back character. I think at the start she was very shallow. In CS1 and CS2, I probably would have bumped her down a notch. But I think some of the character events in CS3 and CS4 that explored her past and her insecurities and her reasons why certain things about her personality are the way they are, as well as her mentorship of Fee, did a good thing to bring her up into the good category. And I think I'm pretty comfortable with her there. And I think I'm going to put Shira right next to her. I think Shira's popularity is mostly similar to Sarah's due to appearance. Her personality in CS1 and CS2 was very limited. I think she had some really, really good high moments, notably surrounding, what was her name, Lucy? I think she was fun to have around, and I think she was memorable. And I think that the eventual reveal of her engagement to Olivier was probably one of the biggest emotional payoffs in the series. So gotta give her some credit there. But I don't think they did a lot to make her feel like she's a well-rounded character in the games up to CS4. I think she's very narrow. Appropriately, Sharon sits halfway between Claire and Ren, because Sharon is the third prime example of, or the, I guess, fourth prime example of redeeming an antagonist. Or between Dooley and Sharon, pardon. Claire kind of fits in that too. But yeah, Sharon is a really interesting character. And I think despite her being, like, nearly perfect in every way as far as, like, her her skills go, like, they've made her during the course of the early parts of the game, they made her into this larger than life vessel of pure competence. I think they, despite that, managed to give her some room to grow, and I really appreciated that. She's a very good character, and her kind of will she won't she relationship with Ouroboros over the course of the series did a lot to make her very
Noise.
to make her a good character and to help her build a role within the story. And I think that's a very strong testament to her character. Amusingly, she's in the same category as Elisa, which I think is kind of fitting, although that was completely accidental. Tio. You know how I said for the most part the
Noise.
main cast of the Crossbow games was going to be on the lower side? Here's our exception to that. Tio sits right up near the top. Tio is adorable. She's a sweetheart. She has this her story she has so much that she has to overcome internally in terms of like accepting herself and her place in the world. And I think that this is the shining success of the Azure series, or the Crossbow series, is making Tio into the character she is. And then how she builds from who she is there, builds relationships into the Cold Steel games, and finds like a role within the rest of the series, is just really, really stellar. She carries the Crossbow series on her back, and not even, a slightest bit of an exaggeration there.
Noise.
I think I'm gonna put Tita in the amazing category here. I think Tita's another one of those characters, and I think Tita benefits a lot from being present in the entire series. You first meet her at home in Liberl, then she shows up a bit throughout. I think she showed up a bit in. I feel like I remember seeing her in the Azure games, although now that I'm saying that, I cannot remember the actual events in it. But I know she was present throughout like the later Cold Steel games, and I know she had some major events in there. But she has this benefit of having years to develop. You get to see her as this young prodigy genius who hasn't really started doing much with that yet. Get to watch her as she starts to, figure out what she wants to do with herself amid the legacy left by her incredibly famous parents. She is the grandchild of one of the most renowned scientists in the world, and her mother is also like that. And I think Tita's character development is given the opportunity to flourish by being spread out over such a long time throughout the series. And I think she benefits a lot from that. Toval, there's not much to say about Toval. He's okay. He's not a bad character. He has some interesting moments, but there's not a lot to remember. Like, it's hard to remember the moments he was a part of. He'll sit comfortably down there. Now we have Toa. I think I have to put Toa up in the best category as well. I adore Toa. I adore the way she is present. I adore the way she's involved in the story. I adore her sincerity and her despite not being the strongest character, how she finds a home and a role um, among the cast and among all of these larger-than-life icons with these incredible powers and these masterful fighters, and still manages to find a home among that. I adore how she was present in the Crossbell games as well. And I think she's just a great character. Only a few more characters left. Wazi, I'll sit comfortably next to Risha in the great category. He has a really fascinating and mysterious kind of a mystique to him. There's this air of mystique, and like, who could have guessed that this playboy host running a gang in Crossbell's downtown district would turn to be who he is. Also, I think his relationship with Bulb is just so it's got such a shonen vibe to it. It's such a protagonist and their rival are, determined to fight each other to prove that they've grown better than the other. Like, it's like Goku and Vegito, or there's so many of them, even outside of shonen, like Ash and Gary to some extent in the early seasons, and there's like this respect between them that borders on looking like hatred, and this determination to show each other the best of themselves. And the way it develops over the series is just really good. I really enjoyed that particular arc that Wazi was a part of. Now we have Doggo. And I think I'm wafting between great and good for Doggo. I debated leaving Doggo out. He might even go into the mine. Like, he could even be down here, and that would be a perfectly fine place for Doggo. But he's Doggo, so I wanted to talk about Doggo, because Doggo is Doggo, and who doesn't like Doggo? I think Zeit's role in the story, especially in the later parts of Azure, is just so important, and so it does such a good job of kind of centering the mystical and the kind of theological elements of the story into reality and into the current day.
Noise.
And I think that is very important. And let's be real here, last but least, I don't remember much about Zin. He's kind of... I remember him being there. I remember him having a few okay moments, but I don't remember anything... I don't remember anything about his character resonating in any way, and I don't remember any big, developmental moments for him, except for, his one big clash at the end of Sky 2. Not much to say. We're ending on a low note, but we're ending, and that is our